we've been warned. The guy who talked about it a lot here in the U.S. During the Biden years was the FBI director, Chris Wray, who on a few different occasions went in front of Congress and was saying, hey, here's what China's doing right now. Here's what North Korea is doing right now. Here's the sophistication they have. David Tice, who once upon a time was a mutual fund manager for the old Prudent Bear Fund. Out of his own pocket, he financed and produced a documentary called Grid Down, Power Up. And it's about the vulnerability of our power grid to cyber attacks. And there's already been instances of this. But you mentioned ransomware because this has gotten so pervasive to the tune of trillions of dollars of lost productivity and lost money and property now every year. It's gotten so pervasive that it's not just these bad state actors for geopolitical reasons or warfare reasons that are able to do this. It's people that will steal your information and hold it for ransom. And this is going on all of the time. So it's really more than we've ever seen. It's brought forward the need for companies and technologies that will provide the kind of new protection that we need against these newer and really quantum threats.
Welcome to Investor Ideas Podcast. Today I'm talking to Chris Temple, editor and owner of The National Investor, talking about cybersecurity and what's next for the sector. For disclosure purposes, our site does not make recommendations for purchase or sale of stocks, services, or products. Nothing on our site should be construed as an offer or solicitation to buy or sell products or securities. All investing involves risk and possible losses. This is not investment opinion from Investor Ideas. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only, and Investor Ideas was not compensated for this content. Good afternoon, Chris. Thanks for joining us today. You're a familiar face on Exploring Mining podcast and always a great guest. So I'm very excited to have you today. For our listeners that don't know who you are, can we just start out with a basic background overview and then lead into your investment strategies?
Well, sure, Don. It's great to be with you, of course. Happy to see you from looks like some sunshine in the background up there in the Okanagan today.
Lots of sunshine, yes. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Beautiful area. I haven't been there in years, but I love it there. Anyway, I got started in the financial planning business at the ripe old age of 18. By the time I was 20, I was a general securities principal for the firm I started with in upstate New York and dealing with people on a daily basis old enough to be my grandparents, maybe great grandparents in some cases. So I got an early start, but from the start, I always gravitated towards educating people. I was a much more comfortable speaker and writer and whatnot than I was a salesman, which is why over the years I gravitated to doing pretty much exclusively speaking and writing and that kind of thing. So the National Investor is my main forte, if you will. I've been doing my newsletter under that name since 1996. Prior to that, it was called Your Money Today, which is the name these days for my own podcast that I've recently brought out of mothballs and do it at least sporadically. And my motto is you can get information anywhere, but here you get knowledge. And I try and help people make sense of the world, make sense of the markets, know when to zig, when to zag, find actionable ideas before everybody else piles into them, etc. So it's a lot of fun, never a dull moment, especially these days with all of the craziness in the world and tariff wars and trade wars on again, off again, half on, half off, half baked, and everything else.
So one of the things we talked about in a phone call earlier was your new investment strategy for FANGs. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, a few years ago, this really started to take off. I did not come up with this term, Dawn, but an analyst at Bank of America Merrill Lynch kind of did a takeoff of the FANGs theme. And for a lot of years, of course, most investors that were familiar with that term recognized the FANGs as meaning Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Each one of them individually seemingly an asset class unto themselves. Still true to some extent. It's morphed into the Mag 7 theme and some similar themes recently. But what this analyst talked about, and we've seen glimmers of this on and off for the last few years now, I think more back on again with the changes in the markets than off. But this guy came up with a new meaning for the FANGs. And instead of Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, the new FANGs, the F stands for fuel of different means, mostly in this context, oil, natural gas, coal, that type of thing, old energy, in other words. And then you've got the two A's, agriculture. Whatever goes on as far as new technologies and whatnot in the world, we still have a growing planet that needs to eat, not just need more fuel. So agriculture is big and everything that goes along with that. The second A is aerospace, aerospace defense and so forth. A lot that falls into that, everything from, and it's not just the munitions makers and things like that, but cyber defense, which we're going to talk about today. A lot of things that go into aerospace as well, including a lot of the minerals and metals that go into that, be it helium for rockets, be it rare earth uh, products that are turned into magnets and guidance systems and things like that. The N in the new thing stands for nuclear energy. It's kind of a catch-all for nuclear energy, uranium, all of the different things. And I'm one of those that's been of the opinion for a while that one of the best stories, if not the best story, and I've shared this with Callie when I've been on with her, of all the commodities, I think is uranium. Has got the best fundamentals. And then G, last but not least, stands for gold, which has been one of my top three stories commodity wise. And I think other metals come in there too in different ways. Base metals in the near term are still going to be a little problematic, but gold has been the leader. Clearly, we've had new records one after the other for a while now.
It's exciting looking at the commodities and especially gold. It's really exciting and it's great to see people be right that believed in something for so long. You're never going to get more avid, more long-term committed investors than gold investors. They're a species of their own, I think.
Well, it's almost a religion. In fact, I've got a special issue out in video form already. I'm going to be augmenting it imminently, where I show a guy that looks. It's almost like you've got a guy at a hazing ceremony at a fraternity, and he's bent over about to get the paddle, and he says, "Thank you, may I have another?" And that's what gold bugs have been like for a long time. It's been that kind of an environment. And still, Don, I remind people all the time. I just actually this week advised our followers to take profits on some of the gold related ETFs that we've been in because I thought that we were getting a little bit too hot. But I still love the sector long term. I've got a number of individual companies. But gold stocks are stocks as well, and there's nothing magical just because it has the word gold in them. And you know very well yourself, I'm sure, that even with gold recently touching the $3,500 an ounce U.S. area before it pulled back a little bit, right before we're having this discussion, most of the equities in the gold space, especially the exploration companies, a lot of them are still dead in the water. There has not been the kind of move in those kind of stocks that we used to see. And there's a lot of reasons for that that I've been explaining to people.
Now, I remember the good old days. I got in the market when I was 19, so I got to see some pretty exciting times. I was in the Murray Pezim days when anything he did went up. I mean, it would trade 8 million shares in a second, but it all went up eventually.
Yeah.
So one of the things I found really interesting looking at cybersecurity stocks is that there's some big winners in the last 6 months and some big losers. A lot of them are up anywhere from 18 to 20 some percent, but there was a couple like Okta that was up 40% in the last 6 months. So when you look at that compared to other sectors, it's pretty exciting to see. And I think the biggest takeaway I find looking at the sector in general is I asked a tech guy years ago, what's the whole point of hacking? Why do hackers do what they do? And he said, evolution. And it was an interesting perspective. I'd never thought of it that way. But now from what I'm seeing, it's not evolution. I see such an increase in ransomware and people paying out in ransomware fees. It seems crazy, and it seems it's really about the money now, for a lot
It
of these
is.
hackers.
Yeah, these things happen every day, Dawn. And, when I've written about this in the recent past, I've hearkened back to news that everybody remembers at the time back in 1998, 1999. We were all getting beat over the head with Y2K fears.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
remember that.
yeah.
And you couldn't, everywhere you looked, you had people warning you about what's going to happen. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to invest in this or that or the other thing to protect yourself, prepare yourself, and so forth. And, that was in relative terms to what we're talking about today, a fairly simple, straightforward problem. And I mean, I remember the one year I went to a community college and took a computer programming class. I remember the zeros and ones and how you string them together and write code and things like that. Well, a lot of people in the early days, or relatively speaking, early days of computerization and the internet back then, nobody gave any thought to the fact that everybody's digits had or years rather, had 2 digits for the year rather than four. And so what happens if we go from 99 to 00? And it was a legitimate
Yeah.
concern. I think a lot of people, a lot of them for mercenary reasons, overstated it. We made a lot of money as investors back then. There were some good companies that had basic, straightforward software patches and things to do to shore up systems. And, in retrospect, it wasn't rocket science. It was a relatively simple problem to cure. But you fast forward to today, Dawn, and you hear the term quantum a lot these days. Quantum computing, all the different companies, Google, Microsoft, they've all got quantum chips they're coming out with. And compared to what you and I did when we first had a computer, first got on the internet, we're light years beyond the capabilities, the speeds, the sophistication, and everything that used to be computerization. The downside of that is that it's made it more possible too for bad actors of different kinds to glom onto this and find ways to break into these systems because the bad guys have had quantum increases and advances in what they're able to do. And it's not just bad state actors anymore. I mean, we've been warned, the guy who talked about it a lot here in the US during the Biden years was the FBI director, Chris Wray, who on a few different occasions went in front of Congress and was saying, hey, here's what China's doing right now. Here's what North Korea is doing right now. Here's the sophistication they have. A very dear friend of mine, David Tice, who once upon a time was a mutual fund manager for the old Prudent Bear Fund, out of his own pocket, he financed and produced a documentary called Grid Down, Power Up. And it's about the vulnerability of our power grid to cyber attacks. And there's already been instances of this. But you mentioned ransomware because this has gotten so pervasive to the tune of trillions of dollars of lost productivity and lost money and property now every year. It's gotten so pervasive that it's not just these bad state actors for geopolitical reasons or warfare reasons that are able to do this. It's people that will steal your information and hold it for ransom. And this is going on all of the time. So it's really more than we've ever seen. It's brought forward the need for companies and technologies that will provide the kind of new protection that we need against these newer and really quantum threats.
Well, one of the things, again, when you look at the data, it's shocking because I just read that 70% of the organizations still get attacked despite improved defenses. And you look at the numbers, 311 billion web attacks in 2024. 311 billion. That's crazy. So
It's remarkable.
I guess the question is, going back to evolution, so it doesn't sound like we're getting better. It just seems like we're just trying to keep an edge against it. It doesn't sound like we've got a handle on it at all.
I don't think completely. I mean, there are ways to protect yourself. You've got the usual suspects, the CrowdStrikes, the Palo Alto networks, and other companies that are the legacy companies in this area. But I'll tell you, what's an interesting investing theme to me, Dawn, and in the recent past, I've added so far two different companies for my subscribers to invest in, where I think that they've got their own little niche. Because when you look at these events where you have this quantum increase in cyber attacks, and therefore you need to have an increase in the kind of uh, protocols, software, services, whatever to protect yourself from them. The best of the companies that come out with the better solutions, they end up getting gobbled up by the big companies. So you'll have a roll-up strategy in the years ahead. This happened with Y2K. I mean, a few of the software companies that I recommended, within months, they were bought out by bigger companies back then. And again, that was nothing compared to the magnitude of the story. And I think in some ways the opportunities today as well. But look, you've got a lot of ability out there on a part of people to protect against this. It just needs to be implemented. And what I see is interesting right now is that more and more when you look, and especially when you're talking about companies that have sensitive information, the financial companies, the credit card companies, the banks, and so forth, it's incumbent on all of them these days, and part of the reporting requirements, that they've got to demonstrate, at least to their shareholders, if not to regulators, what are you doing to protect yourself against these kind of incursions. That's one thing. Another example about how big this field is getting, and I'm sure I'm researching a few other stories right now too, and I'm sure I'll be adding other ones. But look at this whole thing that has been misrepresented in the press somewhat in the U.S. This whole Doge effort, as it's called. And I tell people this all the time because everybody just reads the headlines, usually partisan ones, and doesn't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. Do you realize that the very executive order that President Trump signed, that actually repurposed a body that President Obama had previously set up? It was already there. They renamed it the Department of Government Efficiency. It's not there by its language for Elon Musk and his crew of techies to go in and find out where there's waste going on in federal agencies. That's been an interesting thing to see. But if you look at the actual language of this, Dawn, this Doge thing is the federal government catching up to the threat that is out there. And essentially, this sets up the mechanism to completely update all of the software, the IT systems, the cyber defenses, and everything for every federal agency. Because one of the things that came to light, you may have seen, is with all of this debate recently, I think a lot of Americans had no idea that there was a company called Iron Mountain that literally had zillions of file folders underground in an old salt cavern in
That was
Pennsylvania.
crazy,
That's
actually.
the sophistication of our record keep. I guess at least that stuff can't get hacked.
That was
But
crazy.
yeah, it was crazy. And again, the average person doesn't know that this is out there. So there's a lot of catching up to do by government, by business, and everything like that. And regrettably, it's like everything with technology. Yeah, a lot of great stuff comes for our lives, but a lot of threats and downsides come too. And this is one of them.
Can you talk about a couple of the companies you said you're following or you're involved with? Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, they're proprietary for our subscribers, so I can't get
Oh, okay.
into
Okay.
too many specifics.
Okay, so
But
then
but that
we'll get
said,
people to become a subscriber then.
but you're going to see some stuff from me in a not too distant future that's more for the public domain. But
Okay.
that said, I like the both of them that I've recommended to this point for different reasons. They've got different approaches to this issue. And it's not rocket science again. And I think in both of these cases, these are companies that aren't going to last a year or two before they get bought up by somebody else, because they both are very good at what they're doing. One of them has already got substantial government contracts, I should say, and not just in the U.S. and Canada, but elsewhere. Another one has got an ingenious software tool that is all about securing your password because you go to a website for the first time and think about this. I know I'm sure you've done this, Dawn, and most people listening to us today have done this before. You sign up for a new list, you register for a new service or something you got, and you can either enter your own password or they auto generate a secure password for you. All right. Those aren't secure anymore. So this particular company has a mechanism whereby they take the physical infrastructure, let's say that a business, a bank, or somebody has now, but they're able to basically turbocharge the passwords and make the passwords impregnable. And they've got a mechanism where they store all of your information. And very few companies that do this cybersecurity protection are talking about this. Okay, they all say that they protect you, but one of the two companies I added recently, they also have a secure warehouse where they essentially duplicate all of your systems, all your information and whatnot. So if for sake of discussion, some bad actor, whoever they may be, is able to break into your computer still somehow and take all your information and say, you're not getting your information back until you pay us X. Say, well, enjoy yourself because we've still got it here. We kept a copy. Which
Speaking of
for some,
passwords and security, I don't know if you've had the problem, but for us, we use Gmail and had like a
yeah,
POP3 into our email, and all of a sudden nothing was working anymore. And then I just learned the hard way that Google said they're not going to use, they want more secure passwords, and one of the apps they're not letting to allow to use it is Microsoft Outlook. So everybody's got to find that workaround, and we've been dealing with that for the last few days. So it wasn't a cyber attack, but I guess it was dealing with the whole security of login and passwords. They said they didn't want to deal with that anymore, and you have to use a different
correct.
authentication. So yeah, I mean, you get hit one way or another as companies evolve and develop their security. You have to adapt to the new way of doing things too. And like I said, for us, it was, we didn't know. I mean, ignorance, right? I didn't know. So we're trying to fix that right now.
Yeah, and it's tough. And I mean, God only knows what challenges we're going to have tomorrow. I mean, we're a long ways, from getting on the internet, with an old telephone line and hearing boing to boing, 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 boing to get you onto the internet and all of what we used to do that we thought back in those days, we thought, gee, isn't this great? Look at what we can do right now. And now you got your smartphone like this, and the smartphone does more than the early computers that took up a whole warehouse used to do. So yeah, and it begs a lot of questions on the part of citizens, on the part of investors, as to how you insulate yourself from these kind of issues. One of the things that, getting back to David Tice and his documentary about the power grid and how vulnerable we are here in the U.S., especially where we got all kinds of money to conquer the world and have the finest new fighter jets and things like that, but we can't protect our power grid and so forth. But he's discussed that how little it takes to really screw things up. And it's not just weather. It's not just acts of God. It's the ability of a bad actor of any kind to be able to really mess with you. This is a never-ending story because advances in technology are never-ending. Advances in ingenuity are never-ending. And again, with the good that comes with that, we've got to prepare for the bad and protect ourselves from it as well.
So speaking of ingenuity and technology, AI is playing a big role in both hacking and solutions. So can you talk about your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think AI is a little bit misunderstood. I'm not the best expert to ask about this, certainly, but one of the things I've tried to explain to people when you talk about AI is, and again, I had my phone in my hand a minute ago. When I'm trying to send somebody a text and it auto corrects me That's AI. That's artificial intelligence. People sometimes use a corollary term, machine learning. And, all of these different software platforms get used to what we do, our habits, our speech, our words, and so forth, and do that. AI is good. AI saves time in a lot of different ways. AI is being used now by exploration companies and mining. It's being used by healthcare companies another one of my more recent recommendations is using AI in the health sciences field. It's fascinating stuff. But I think in some ways we need to compartmentalize all of that, Dawn, and look at it for what it's worth. It's not anything necessarily new as far as knowledge. It's just a faster way to get knowledge or a faster way to get to a desired end or a solution. Although getting back to Gmail, one of the first things I tried to do numerous times when I open up a window to send an email and they got their dopey little symbol there that wants me to help me with AI to write an email. No thanks. I didn't ask you. Get the hell out of the way so I can try and type because it took longer until I figured out how to get around it.
Well, I know with Sentinel One, that that stock's had some issues with their one of their leaders having to step down because of Trump. But one of the reasons I think analysts likes it is because of AI, because it can detect and deal with threats in real time. So again, looking at AI, it has its place in solutions, but I've read a lot of the hackers used AI to come in and actually create the attacks, and they can do them faster. They can access information faster. So I think AI is going to play a big role on both sides of the equation.
Well, it will, just like quantum computing, the quantum chips and so forth. One of the interesting threats and a very scary one that I learned about recently, it's called a handle attack, which HNDL, harvest now and download later. And that's something that people should look up because even in the case where, let's say, we've got a bad actor or someone that wants to steal your information for ransom, they may not be able to break into or through a password or through a firewall, but there is still the ability, and this is being done every day, there's still the ability, without you even knowing it, for someone, if you're on the internet, to take your information, take a program, take data, and essentially take a copy from your computer, even if they can't break into it. So that's harvest now. They get the information. And then as the quantum and AI and other abilities catch up, they can download it later. Once the technology is there for them to download it, they can download it later. And there's a lot of this going on. So a lot of the people that follow this a lot more closely than I do are warning that, we've not seen the worst of this. We might see every time that there's an increase in the computing power of one of these new quantum chips, or there's an increase in the machine learning abilities that bad actors can use to break into data, all of a sudden you'll think that you're free and clear, and 6 months from now, just for sake of discussion, there could be something manifest itself to you that, oh, somebody's got your information, but you didn't even think you were invaded. But now all of a sudden they've got the ability to open this up. So again, this, it takes different forms over time, but it's all part of the same issue. Yes, we've got blessings and greater efficiencies and greater speed because of technology and thanks to technology, but the downside is the bad guys can do it too.
So you can't give us the names of your two stocks that you're involved in, but can you give advice to investors that want to get into the cybersecurity stocks, both Canadian and the US? What should they look for? What are some of the things you think are keys to success?
Well, look, there's two things you can do, Don, as an investor. First of all, if you don't want to do a lot of homework or you don't follow someone who does the homework for you and says, okay, I think you should look at this company specifically or this company specifically, there are exchange traded funds out there that will give you broad representation. in cybersecurity stocks. You know, for example, the two big ones here in the U.S. I think in our markets are the symbols are HACK, HACK, and the other one I believe is Cyber, CYBR. And those have got, you know, companies of all sizes in there. You get broad representation of all the different companies that are in this field. Aside from that, you can roll up your sleeves and start to do research on companies or follow, you know, you or me or whoever that does that. And I think people, you know, could look at doing both strategies depending on how much homework they want to do themselves. But on that ladder, when you're looking at individual companies, look at those companies that have got strong partnerships, companies that have got involvement with the CrowdStrikes, with the Palo Alto networks, and so forth. I'll give you a little bit of a hint and a teaser here. If you go and look at some of the recent press releases of some of the big companies, look at the names of the smaller companies that they've announced alliances with, and I'll give you a little bit of a wink there. Okay. Look at those companies who aren't trying to reinvent the whole space, but can come up with a patch. Okay. One of the companies I added recently, I love the way that they characterize it. You may have a great, beautiful new home with a very stout door. It's solid, it's well constructed, and so forth, but the lock is lousy. The lock can be picked easily. Okay. You don't have to replace the whole house, just replace the lock. And so there's software companies out there that are all about doing that and focusing strictly on the password protocols, which is really the Achilles heel of a lot of people's data protection and so forth, because increasingly there is no such thing anymore is a foolproof password.
And like I said, going back to Google and Gmail, they obviously see that, the fact that they're saying,
Yeah.
you know, not working anymore, not going to use it, and we're changing everything. So looking at again the data, and you see how much the attacks were up in 2024. They're already up. They said 50% in the first quarter of 2025, which is unbelievable. So how do you see the whole thing unfolding? What does the next couple of years look like?
I'll tell you what it looks like to me, and I'm looking at this, Dawn, more so in geopolitical terms. And with the whole changing of the global order, we're going, even by the admission of the Trump administration itself, though it doesn't always act this way, we are going to more of a multipolar world. The days of the U.S. Being king of the hill in most respects, which we've had since the end of the Second World War, are leaving us. And that's really something that's been underway for a while now. It's accelerating. Um, and notwithstanding the likelihood near term that we're going to see a continuation, I think, of the stepping back from a nastier trade war and tariff war and so forth in the world, the fact of the matter is that countries are still competitors in various ways. And it's not just military, it's on economics, it's on a variety of things. And I think that what we're going to see more of as time goes on is threats against um, government agencies, the ability of governments to protect us. Um, I've said for a long time, you've got a lot of scaremongers out there, and I've heard these dopey things for years. You know, China's got a bunch of these Gurkha troops up there, and not far from you. I had some people try and tell me one time that China's got troops on the Canadian border just across from extreme northwest Montana, northern Idaho. They're going to invade, or they've got troops in Mexico. They're going to invade the U.S. There's no need for that, because if China really wants to mess with the U.S. or Russia or Iran or North Korea or anybody, that's overkill. You don't need to do that. There's umpteen ways that they already have the ability to do to disrupt utilities, disrupt communication. I mean, imagine, and for years in different contexts, I've asked this question when I give talks about the fragility of our banking system, for example. What would you do if tomorrow morning you woke up and the world as we know it ceased to exist while you were sleeping? You got no bank, no ATM machine, no gas station. The gas pumps don't work because the electricity's gone. No grocery stores, no nothing. What are you going to do? How long can you live? How can you protect your family? How can you feed yourselves? How are you going to heat or cool yourself, as the case may be? Now here in Florida, we're better at most people in relative terms at this drill because every year we got hurricanes one place or another. So, by nature, we get ready to prepare. Some people in northern climates for bitter cold, they prepare. But this is what I worry about. I don't worry as much, honestly, about, Chris Temple's computer and, not having my information backed up because I do in 3 or 4 places. And, I'm not going to lose anything. I might lose the ability to function with anything new. Okay. But that's what I worry about down the road is that at what point do we see some international tension or somebody that may not be necessarily a government actor, by definition, that just wants to mess with the markets, mess with the global economy. We have become so dependent on this. And I was reading something earlier. Um, who one of the people in management at IBM, and she runs the European operations for IBM, was saying, and I'm paraphrasing her, but saying that we're always on the edge of an information and operational Armageddon. You don't know when something is going to happen to where all of a sudden we don't have the ability to do what you and I are doing right now. And once upon a time, people knew how to live and exist in circumstances like that. We have become so overly dependent on electronics and communication and IT and all the rest of this stuff that we wouldn't know what to do, the average person.
Well, I think a lot of the gold buffs know what to do. They've been planning for years. If you read those newsletters and you read those articles that come out, I think a lot of those people are pretty well prepared.
Oh, I'm sure, and a lot of people are, and I've told people forever, even though I have been a major critic of a lot of the dopier stuff that I've seen among the perma bears and the gold bugs and stuff like that. Nevertheless, as a practical matter, I've always been an advocate of being able to answer that question that I pose. What would you do if tomorrow morning you woke up and your computer won't turn on? You got no TV, you got no lights, you've got no nothing. You don't have a grocery store, you don't have a gas station, you can't access your bank account. Everything is frozen for a while, and maybe for an indeterminate amount of time. And, all it takes for something like that to happen, China, and I'm not saying they're ready to do this, but just to, talk about some of the scare tactics and fear mongering that's been out there forever, that's not without foundation. You know, they don't need to send troops to the US. All you need to do is send a plane overhead. Hell, Biden let a Chinese balloon go traverse the US while he was in office. No big deal. I mean,
That was a great headline story.
you know, and what if one of them has got a low yield nuclear device and you detonate it at a certain altitude and you fry everything? You don't need to send troops. All you need to do is something like that. There's different ways because of how archaic, especially here in the U.S., most of our public utilities, water utilities, and everything are. It won't take much to disrupt that. So I've been one for a long time, and which is one of the reasons I've championed my friend's David Tice's documentary. I'm going to make sure that you've got the link to that. Is that this is stuff that we need to be focused on, not trying to conquer the world and brag about having the first $1 trillion military budget like the Orange Wonder's been doing recently. But hey, let's instead of worrying about how much we're spending on new airplanes, including one he had the name after himself, literally, the F-47. Let's make sure that we can keep the lights on in the US. Let's make sure we can keep access to the gas pumps and to our bank accounts and things like that. So to me, where all of this is going, and yeah, there's a lot of things we need to worry about as individuals and small businesses, but I worry about the strategic aspect of this and how bad our cyber defenses are where that's concerned too.
So just in closing, going back to talking about the stocks, I know Roth came out with some buy recommendations on some of the big ones like CrowdStrike. What do you think of the sector overall? I mean, we're talking about the numbers, they just keep going up. At some point, and like I say, I've been looking at some of the stocks over the last 6 months, they've had big runs. I would have to think that that's going to materialize into more big runs, because if people are getting these increases in attacks, every organization, every individual is going to have to spend money on some kind of prevention.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Dawn, and I think that it's got a great future, regrettably, because of what
Regrettably,
we're
yes.
trying to protect ourselves against. But look, like I said earlier in our conversation, you've got regulators now who understand these issues and essentially are mandating that all types of companies have to have a game plan. It's like, what are you doing about this? And on top of that, with the federal government here in the U.S., our own DOGE efforts specifically, and everybody realizes the imperative of making sure that systems are not only updated but protected from all of these new generations of cyber threats and so forth. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that there's a lot of business, a lot of money that's going to be spent, a lot of money that's going to be made on these things. And no question that, this part of the aerospace slash defense part of the new FANGs, it's defense not only for us as a country and militarily, in military terms, but for us as a society, to defend ourselves against things like this.
Well, I personally think it should be one of the biggest parts of the budget for all countries for defense is cybersecurity, because as you said, it's a lot easier to come in and take over with cybersecurity hacks versus bombs, guns. It's just an easy way to get in.
Yeah, but the bomb and gun makers, the military industrial complex don't make as much money on those as they do the planes and the bombs, and that's why more money is spent on that stuff.
Well,
Unfortunately.
it's just my opinion, and I don't run any.
Oh, yeah, I share that. I share that.
I don't get to
We
make
should
any decisions.
we should spend a small fraction of a fraction of what we do on guns and bombs and planes, and if we're going to spend anything on defense, look to these areas. And I hope that more people do, and that we wake up to this as a society before we regret not doing so.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. And I look forward to hearing more from you on Exploring Mining podcast and talking about gold and uranium. But yeah, you're a great source of knowledge. So just give people in closing your website again. I think you have a couple of websites.
Well, sure. The big one is nationalinvestor.com, and pretty much everything I do is linked to that. Also check out yourmoneytoday.org, which is my website for my recently reborn podcast.
And when I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I saw that you'd been doing the one, I think for 40 some years, I'm like, that's got to be wrong. But after you just said you've been doing this since you're 18 years old.
Well, 1979
Yeah.
was when I first got into the financial field straight out of high school. I went to work for a local financial planning company owned by a family that I already knew in the upstate New York area where I'm from. And yeah, that's pretty much all I've ever done. And, was in the retail financial planning world for a lot of years, but slowly but surely, gravitated in the direction I'm in these days.